What can life teach us about business?
And what can business teach us about life?
If we succeed in one, do we have to sacrifice the other?
I'm Sarah Armstrong.
And I'm Colt Briner.
We met in the boardroom working as execs, but we've developed a unique friendship posing these and other philosophical questions to each other.
We bring a passion for continual learning and deep friendships to this podcast that contemplates living elevated lives.
While we have very different life experiences, we're also kindred spirits in the pursuit of knowledge and meaningful personal relationships.
Come with us as we challenge each other and our guests to think differently, be open to new perspectives, and embark on journeys of elevated lives. Well, we did not expect our second episode to be happening in person. There's been some delays.
That is true. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Hurricane Ian, for the delay. But happy that we have power, we have internet, and minimal damage that's allowed you all to come and visit. So it's great.
Right. And for those who may not know, you live in Naples, Florida.
I do live in Naples, Florida. We've lived here for about 3 years. Mm-hmm. We love it. It's beautiful. It's like living in paradise. Yeah. The detractor is, of course, hurricane season, but we're very fortunate. We
made it through
just fine. So it was a little scary, and we certainly think about the community as a whole and the people that were so heavily impacted and the businesses that were so heavily impacted. Yeah. I mean, it's really, what you see on the news is for real.
It's for real, yeah.
It's for reals, yeah.
I remember driving from the airport to get here, trees at least this big around were snapped. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a lot of wind. The freeway signs down, folded, wrecked, okay.
Yeah, the morning after, for those of you who may not know, my husband runs a personal concierge business here in town, and he takes care of people's homes and things when they're out of town, does a lot of home watch and airport transport things. And so, our first priority was to take care of the customers and get out and see, the damage. A lot of them were not at home. They wanted to know how their house fared. So we were out pretty early the morning after on Thursday, and wow. Huh. There were roads that were impassable because there were boats all over the road. There was one condo complex that had, 4 or 5 boats kind of blocking the whole entrance. So it was devastating. But we're happy to be back and happy that our schedules aligned and allowed you and your lovely lady Julia to visit us. And we're excited to just hang out and catch up and relax.
Well, good deal. So in our last episode, we kind of laid it out. We laid out the vision for what we're aiming to bring to the world here, really talking about personal growth. We talked about the personal board of directors, diversity of thought. And in this episode, we're going to sort of set that foundation. We're going to talk about what is growth, what does it mean to you, what does it mean to me, and would like to sort of get through some stories about our own experience in personal growth, yeah?
Yeah, and I think talking about it as, how the board of directors helps you grow. So we hit on that a little bit last time. But then also talk about the process of what it feels like to kind of go on this journey of growth, which is uncomfortable. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, I think, and how we pushed individually in our own stories, pushed through that, and how important that growth trajectory is to us and to who we are today.
Right on. Well, so that's a great topic to jump in on, which is this relationship between growth and discomfort. And I think it was Mark Kithcart, colleague of mine, who was the first guy to introduce me to that concept. Well, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing. And I just sort of took it at the face value, okay, that's what that means. If I'm not uncomfortable, I'm not growing. And I've probed at this a long time, and I've asked a lot of people, is growth possible without discomfort, is a question that I've wrestled with. And my personal take at this point is, I don't think that it really is. I think you can learn, but I don't know that learning and growing are the exact same thing. Because I can read a book on a hammock. That's pretty comfy, right? And I can gain knowledge, but I don't think that that's the same thing.
I agree, and I think people's definition of growth is different. So people may think about growth as career aspirations or personal wealth or whatever. That's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about growing as an individual to expand your mind, to understand yourself, your self-awareness, and then grow the skills to literally change behaviors, right? Those hardwired behaviors. That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about growth, is how do you kind of come face to face with your own weakness and look it square in the eye, and then go on a path to make it less of a weakness. Because no one's perfect and we all have strengths and weaknesses. But what we're really talking about is how do you identify how you are getting in your own way, how you may be behaving in a way that's not conducive to what you want and who you want to be perceived, how you want others to perceive you, and then to set about, changing those behaviors and changing how other people experience you.
Totally. I have always thought of, and I've instructed Adrian on this thinking a few times, more than a few times, that the arc of your life is your work of art. Your life is your central artwork, and that's an ever evolving thing. I said, you can take a canvas and leave it outside, and things will happen to that canvas, or you can be very active on how you're going to build that canvas out. And I don't think it's an ending process. I don't think growth is an arrive at and stop part of life. I think how we can choose to grow and bring ourselves to people and bring ourselves to meeting whatever life has for us to meet is ever evolving.
Yeah, and I think that everything has a light and a dark side, right? So the things that are kind of innate in my DNA that make me really good at some things have a dark side.
Yes.
And I also think that one of the things that I wanted to also mention is I have seen a lot of posts and articles and all these things about being your authentic self, which I understand is well intended.
Sure.
I think that some people interpret that to be, I am who I am and I'm being my authentic self and I want to bring my authentic self to work. And I think the danger in that is that being your authentic self kind of is a place to hide from personal growth.
Wow, yes.
So we're encouraging people to be themselves, to be true to who they are, yet also kind of come face to face with those dark sides of us and seek to bring some light and some growth in those areas. Yeah,
so the balance there's a component of discovery. Your authentic self is something that you have to discover, and then there's an act of creation, right? So I would think that it could almost be like a serial approach where discovering kind of who you are has to be a step one in the process of defining what you wish to become. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, we could probably debate the chicken or the egg.
Sure, yeah.
Because I think sometimes we think we are something different than how the world experiences us. And so to me, figuring out who you want to be and then evaluating who you currently are to figure out that gap is sometimes more tangible so that you can kind of figure out, okay, these are the specific things that I want to work on, because kind of just putting out into the universe, I want to grow as a person. Well, that's not actionable, right? So what we're talking about is really having a path to say, I want to work on these 3 things. You're not going to wake up all of a sudden and be a different person.
Totally.
Right? So I think, in some regard, those 2 things are very, very closely aligned, but we could probably debate which should come first or second. It's like 1 and 1A,
Yeah, totally, yes. So I would say that in the earliest instances of my own personal growth that I can recall, I don't think many or even any of them came from deliberate sense of, I wish to go from here to there. But I could certainly recall that they were uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think mine was a bit more intentional, and I think probably because I had a different catalyst than you did. And looking back on it, it was less, I want to become this person, and more, I don't want to be this other person.
I see.
So it was less of a path of I'm going toward this, more of a path I'm going away from that, which I think has equal value. But as I got through the stages and got more comfortable with the growth process, then I became to be more intentional and was more about going towards something.
Do you have like a story you want to share?
Sure. I shared a little bit of it in my TED Talk. I talked about having a mentor, but and kind of the catalyst in my life about losing my husband. So I talked a little bit about that in the TED Talk, but I'll go a little bit deeper to say, obviously, the death of my husband when I was so young and I had, young kids, was traumatic, as it would be for anyone. And I reacted very strongly to how people reacted to me and my loss. And what
How
I
they
mean,
reacted to your story.
how they reacted to my story. My physical presence made people uncomfortable because my grief made people uncomfortable. And us over time, I've understand it more. It just made them uncomfortable because they wanted to say the right thing and they didn't know what that was.
Yeah,
they
sure.
couldn't really relate. So anyway, I reacted strongly to being a widow, a 31-year-old widow, and that label. And I felt like kind of all eyes were on me. And I remember going back to work after some time off, and that's where I met Rob. And I kind of threw myself into work. And then because I was throwing myself into work, and in my head I was thinking, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be labeled as a widow. I don't want that to be my story and what people see when they look at me. Those two things kind of collided in a way that allowed me to ask Rob to mentor me professionally.
Yeah.
That turned into just this massive personal growth. And it still happens today. I mean, that's been almost 15 years ago. And so the first thing was to say, I want to grow in whatever that, whatever
Fueled
language.
by, prompted by, so maybe prompted and fueled by are different things, but I know discomfort's in there. Would you say it was prompted by or fueled by discomfort?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Probably more prompted by discomfort and fueled by just grit.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I am going to do something different.
Okay.
Like with a vengeance,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it was a very emotionally charged grit.
Okay.
So yeah, lots of emotions going on obviously at that time. So the first step was asking Rob, who was in a position in my professional workplace, to offer me professional mentoring. And I had no idea what I was signing up for, and he just smiled and said, okay, sure, And then the next step was for him to put that mirror up and show me how people perceived me.
Yeah.
Which was not in alignment with my intention. And
uncomfortable moments.
There were tears.
Oh, okay.
More than once, I'm not going to lie.
Wow.
It made me extremely uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, perception is reality. And whether my intention was, to be more domineering and closed-minded and controlling, that wasn't my intention, but that's how other people experienced me. So that is who I was to them.
Yeah, I get it.
And then to kind of figure out, oh, okay, that's hurtful. And I'm not only am I getting in my own way and I'm not being the person that I want to be, I'm actually causing harm to these people, right? I'm making them uncomfortable in a very non-productive way, right? There's productive being uncomfortable. There's non-productive being uncomfortable. So over the course of 2 or 3 years, really very intense work. The amount of time that he devoted to me I still can't get over it. And I think we're going to actually talk to him. We'll get his side of the story soon. But so again, I was very fortunate. But it was I remember one meeting. In particular, after we had a conversation about defensiveness and closed-mindedness. And I had a tendency, I think you've told me that I've told you the machine gun story, right?
Yes.
So in this story, I'll try to make this brief, but during this period of time where he was holding up the mirror, he told me that I went to meetings and communicated to people like a machine gun, rat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat. And my ability to process information very, very quickly turned into me firing ideas or thoughts or whatever at people like bullets. And then he said, and then at the end of the meeting, everyone's dead, you get your way, and you think you've won something. And of course I did. I would come out of the meeting and feel like, oh, what a great, we're going to do what I thought. Like I had this great idea. And then of course at the meeting, after the meeting was good night. Like she is a hot mess. Like nobody wanted to be, I just wore people out.
Yeah.
Right. So, anyway, so that story, and I remember hearing that story and him telling me that and really processing that. And then just maybe a week or two later, I was in a meeting, and I remember this meeting so clearly, where there was a controversial topic and someone said something that I didn't like, and I just went down this tirade about why they were wrong. And I stopped myself in the middle of my tirade and said, you know what? I'm being defensive, and this is not helpful to finding a solution. So give me a minute and let's get back on track.
Wow.
And we did, and he gave me very positive comments after that meeting. But and then it became easier, right? I would identify it quicker, and then I could get myself kind of centered so that it didn't even happen to start
Preempt
with.
it, yeah.
But we're like all of these overcorrections, right? Like this pendulum is constantly swinging, and some days I was great at it,
Yeah.
and some days I wasn't. But it was a lot of growth, a lot of growth during that period of time.
Powerful. Yeah, and I could see what you were saying about fueled by grit, but prompted by discomfort. To see how what I'm trying to say, that the potential for what you could become, I think, is also part of what's happening for you, right? So it's a combination, of prompted by discomfort, fueled by grit, but did that future state, I don't know if Rob painted a future state. Now imagine now if in a meeting it looked like this. Was there any kind of future state, or just stop being this?
Well, the future state was he led by example. So I would go to meetings with him, and I would see how he interacted with people. I would hear how people commented to him or after the meeting, about the meeting. So he led by example. And again, during this period of time, the amount of time he gave me, because we would go to meetings and then he would pull me into his office or down the hall immediately after for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And he would say, okay, did you see this? Did you see that? When you said this, how did this person react? Did you see their body language? Did you, and then conversely, when he would have a meeting and had an outcome that was positive, he would pull me aside and say, did you see this? Did you see that? I think Louis just made an appearance in our podcast as he gets settled on the other side of the room. But anyway, so that leading by example was more, he didn't tell me, he showed me.
I mean, how powerful, right? I mean, it's like, I think about this as an amazing mirror to be able to look into. He provided you an amazing mirror. I mean, and what you're talking about, that mentorship by example, also very powerful, where you get to see, you get to have the feedback, the mirror feedback. These are the things that I observe. Can you see these things now? Reflecting on the meeting. We just had this meeting. Can you see them now? And then also that opportunity to watch somebody directly have a different experience than you're having from people, where you get to see, oh wow, people are reacting to him differently. There is a different way that people can react to me. Massive gift, but how do we achieve something like that outside the context of such a close mentoring relationship?
Well, I think so eventually we parted ways, right?
Sure.
We our careers took us down different paths, and I no longer had him.
Yeah.
And I can just tell you from my experience, I started asking people. So instead of having Rob tell me what he observed or kind of laying out the breadcrumbs, so to speak. So after I didn't work with him any longer, I found a couple of people in my current organization that I started just asking, hey, do you mind, can I ask you, how do you feel like that meeting went? What did you see that I didn't see? Wow. And it's, it's amazing how people are very giving in that regard.
Sure.
I mean, you want to choose those people wisely, of course, which kind of takes us back to our personal board of directors conversation. But, when you are open to that kind of feedback and people give it to you and you react in a way that's positive and they feel like they're helping the behavior change, or they're helping bring something to resolution in a positive way, they're very generous with their time. And they'll tell you what they and there's great insight.
I really, that's such great guidance. I was thinking just now about oftentimes the initial form of feedback comes almost as a joke or a poke at somebody, right? Because they're aware that you may be not aware that something's happening. I was with Matthew in Jacksonville, and we were driving, and we were trying to figure out how to get to McDonald's in the morning. And I told him it was going to be up this way, 10 minutes from now it's up this way on the right side of the street. And we had passed that one. I was looking at my phone, and apparently we had passed that one, ended up finding one another few miles up on the left side of the street. They're like Starbucks, right?
Right.
All over the place. And he said, no, it turned out to be on the left side of the street. And I was like, stand by. And I went to the phone, and I opened the Google map, and I went to the one that I had seen and showed it to him. He said, you must be a delight to argue with. And I had my laugh at that, but then clearly that I'm remembering this moment because it stuck with me. I'm like, first of all, I said, Julia she'd have a hoot if you called her up and said that moment had happened. But it pointed to me, it pointed to something that I think is worth looking at, because I am very just drive to the facts in an argument rather than hearing a person. That's an area that I want to grow. Mm-hmm. And you can laugh off a comment like that, and many should be just laughed off.
Yeah.
Others warrant exploring and looking into, and then taking a moment to consider what's being pointed at there. Mm-hmm. That could be even more present or more meaningful in a romantic relationship than would be happening with your work bro kind of thing. So I found that to be an interesting moment. I don't yet have the nuance figured out of how do you identify just that, dude, kind of comment versus something to look at here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably way back in the recesses of your brain that has been brewing. Either you've gotten some feedback, or you've had an experience that has illustrated that perhaps you had an area of opportunity of growth there.
Yeah.
And so the comment was less about the comment, but more it's like a little sore spot, right? It's like a little bruise that Matthew touched, and so you probably had some kind of visceral tummy reaction to that.
You're totally right.
Makes it, you pull it out of the box and look at it, right? But again, I mean, there's nothing wrong with sticking to the facts, right? There's a lot of value in being a very fact-oriented person. But there's a dark side when it's taken too far, which is what you're talking about.
Yes.
So it's finding that balance, that pendulum swing of, well, I can't go all the way to where the facts are irrelevant. Right. We know people like that.
Yep.
But where do the facts improve the situation? Sure. And in the McDonald's situation, probably didn't.
Right. I mean, but you're right. It totally did. It pointed to something that, if I'm being honest with myself, is it's coming into my awareness, and that's something that happens over months or years even. And it was that's interesting that you mentioned it that way, because as things come into my awareness, you become aware of people reflecting it back to you, even in colloquial dialogue and just interesting conversation. You're like, oh, that's where that's coming up for me. As soon as you kind of identify or even choose to set an area of yourself where you'd like to develop, the mirrors begin emerging in your life. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah. So you probably have your own story of personal growth that's very different than my experience, and probably don't have the same, I obviously don't have the same catalyst, but I'm interested to hear, what is that, when you think about personal growth, what is that moment for you, and what was that journey like?
Certainly in anticipation of our conversation, I thought about many. And the one that came up for me is also career-oriented. I think we should eventually dialogue more about how we could talk about growth on the personal side. So what came up for me, so right out of college, or very shortly after I graduated, I started my own company. And I had, written out this performa, very, very ambitious Pollyanna performer for what this company was going to create if I could really pursue it. And that ended up with a big number at the end. I was like, whoa, man, yes.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to be worth a fortune.
Totally, yeah. Guys.
Yeah.
It was one of those things.
Yeah.
So, I had this really big number that was fueling my ambition, I guess you would say. And I, looking back on it, I fooled myself. I fooled myself into what this thing could actually be. I can look at it now and say, well, of course, the outcome that happened, which was modest but still useful, was really going to be the outcome that I was going to get out of that. But what that allowed me to do was to really pursue everything that's required for starting one's own company. And that ended up being more than I thought. And even the areas where I thought I was going to learn more, I'd certainly learn more. And then all the areas where I had no idea that we're going to be, I have to lean into and figure this out and solve that problem and figure this out and solve that. And it's like, it just kept coming. And it was uncomfortable, right? I knew I was uncomfortable. Like, I don't know, this is not an area of specialty. I just wanted to do this thing, and this is what I was excited about. This is what my dream was at. This was where the energy was at, was this. But now I have to do all of this. And so as I look back, I can see that so many of the things that eventually made me, capable of interacting in like the C-suite and the boardroom came from that experience. And the growth for gaining those skills and abilities and just knowledge of the full breadth of what business really means was uncomfortable to learn, but in my case, fueled by this, what turned out to be overambitious sense of what was possible.
So you touched on something that I want to make sure that we pick at, whether we do it in this moment or in a minute, but it's how all of this bleeds over from your personal and your professional life.
Sure.
So one of the things about this podcast that we want to explore is how those skills really are intertwined in so many ways. So we've talked a lot about how, personal and professional skills and abilities bleed over into each other. So would you be willing to share how your personal life benefited from this growth and this uncomfortable space that you encountered when you started your business? So one of the things that I had to figure out was when is enough. And this is with the actual intersect between personal and professional, especially when you're running your own gig and you're your own boss. I did like 2 a.m. nights a lot. Starting that company, because I was doing everything from building product, managing inventory, making the sales, and then running the company. And there's that lack of anyone like blowing the whistle or ringing the bell or whatever. So I had to gain that sort of, you need to be the person responsible for balance now. And I didn't do it well initially, but found just out of necessity that I was going to have to decide, I'm only going to get so far today. And make that like, okay, because I have to also live a life. Right.
Especially as it started to become evident that this thing wasn't going to make me $10 million in 6 months. Or whatever I had decided it was going to do. So that's where I came to that point of deciding on balance. And then I started to recognize that that's a question that I can bring to like every part of my life, is the question of balance. We've talked about things like exerting versus allowing, which is an area of balance. So yeah, I would say that opened up a whole dimension of what was possible for growing personally.
Yeah, that's a great example of how the reflection in one influences the other, and potentially, being uncomfortable in your personal life forced you into the evaluation of balance, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's interesting. I think one of the biggest things that I have carried over from my growth story and my growth journey is just trust, and how important trust is in both situations, both personally and professionally, and how when you interact with people, how do you make them feel safe?
Sure.
Yeah, because professionally, as a leader, you want people to feel safe so that they can innovate and they can kind of, bring their ideas and not be afraid to tell you that something went terribly awry, so that you can address it. And it fuels people that they work harder for people that they trust and all that kind of stuff. But in my personal life, I think being a trusted friend has been so rewarding and something that is very important to me as I think about how I want the world to experience me. I want people to think of me as a trusted friend, as a trusted advisor. I think if you were to poll some folks, they would say, they can count on me to tell them the truth, but also keep confidences and tell them the truth in such a way that it comes from love and comes from a place of caring for them. And so it enriches all of those relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important as you continue to grow and develop as a leader, or as a parent, as a friend, as a romantic partner.
Yeah, and then I think that this element of trust that you just brought up, so critical in that this idea of if you're really just looking out for someone else, that the guidance you're giving them isn't agenda driven on your behalf, right? Like, I'm going to tell this person this is the way that they probably want to look at changing because that's how I want them to be.
Right.
Versus just purely listening to where they're at, understanding if they've reached a point of, I think this is where I want to be next, and then serving that desire for them purely out of that desire for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking back on the conversation we had a few minutes ago about when you don't have a mentor, right? And you've got to kind of figure out how to get that feedback. And one of the things I was thinking about is how I got more comfortable seeking out the negative feedback. So I would say early stages of my career, if I would go to a meeting and someone would have that really negative body language, right? The arms crossed, the stony face, that I'm not going to contribute, or maybe even contrarianism, whatever. My goal was to just get out of the meeting and get out of that uncomfortable situation as quickly as possible.
Sure, yeah.
And if people could, kind of crowd out that person so that they didn't speak or they didn't have that contrarianism, then all the better. As I've gotten much older and more experienced in my journey, I go seek those people out, right? Either if I don't have a trusted relationship with them, I may come to them after the meeting and say, hey, I sense something wasn't going your way. Can you tell me, what's going on? Are you having a bad day? Do you just disagree with this at the core? Like, what is happening? So they may feel more comfortable opening up in a much more intimate setting.
Sure.
But as people, build that trust and have better team building experiences, then, kind of asking someone in a meeting, hey, I'm reading your body language. You don't really like the direction of this conversation. Can we just pause here and talk about what are you reacting strongly to?
During a meeting?
During a meeting, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, I just got...
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. You can't start there, right? You don't want to call somebody out because that is the opposite of building trust.
Right, yes.
But once you have that established trust, right? I can think of several people that I would be very comfortable saying in a certain setting.
In a meeting, if you did for me, I'd be like, you're totally on it. Yes, that's exactly where I'm at.
That's exactly.
I'd be like, oh, I didn't even notice. You're right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And it would obviously depends on the topic, the attendees, all those things. We have to be mindful of that. But that level of trust to be able to seek out that negative feedback. In a way that's not emotionally charged, I think is so valuable.
Yes.
And that then carries over into home, where you may have an encounter that's emotionally charged with a child or a spouse or whatever. And to be able to have that conversation to say, okay, I'm sensing something here. Can we talk? Can we push pause? Can we talk about it? Or talk about it? Okay, we're not all worked up at this moment. Yesterday didn't go very well. Can we talk about it now? Those things are really important to, positive resolution and bringing people closer together and reconciling different experiences and thoughts.
Learned a great question from Julia. I think the phrasing is, are you aware of any blind spots that I've got? Just kind of like, not in a, let's sit down, I want to talk about something, but just like in the right moment. I want to ask you a question. Are you aware of any blind spots that I've got? Powerful question.
Yeah.
Blind spots, you don't have any idea where you have opportunity.
That's right.
Because it's not something you can see for one reason or another. And somebody else might be able to see it for you and then offer that to you. Very powerful.
Yeah. Super powerful. So I think one of the things that we wanted to also talk about is this is not an end game, right? You're never done.
Yeah.
So can you also share with me a little bit about how that growth experience has carried forward, and how do you incorporate growth into your life today?
I would say I do a lot of reading, looking for opportunities in those regards. Seeking feedback, though I find it to be uncomfortable, is something that I do. Looking, as we talked about with this moment with Matthew, looking for the bumps of the thing that you have an intuition about. That is that thing right there. That's it, huh? Trying to identify patterns in interactions with people that are leading to a common result, even if it's across different people. When you identify a common denominator, this guy, right? And start looking at those things to seek ways to prevent those recurring experiences, if they're negative, recurring negative experiences from happening by identifying common denominator right here. So what do I need to do? What do I need to look at? I think that's probably what it's looking like for me. I will say that the exercise of personal growth isn't one that I have brought the kind of vigor that I recognize as possible. Again, that would be a question of balance, but just to kind of open the box on this thing. This is why we're starting this conversation. I'm not in this conversation because personal growth is something that I've got nailed, and I'm here to share through this podcast what I have nailed. I'm interested in it. I want to know what it looks like. I want to do a better job at it myself. And through this conversation and the conversations that I know we've got lined up with our guests, I want to go on the journey and bring people along.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for me, it's also been, I have personally found it so rewarding that I want other people to experience what I have experienced, right? The benefit, the professional growth, the personal relationships, the network that I've been able to just really put together, and how I collaborate with them and all those kinds of things. I want to pay that forward. And so it's funny. I mean, I think about how could I ever repay Rob? I can't, except to pay it forward. And I used to say, we haven't talked like this in a long time, but I used to call him, when we first parted ways, we would catch up and I would call him and say, Rob had a good day today. And let me tell you why Rob had a good day today. And I would tell him a story about how I used something that he taught me in a positive way so that he got to experience that. We haven't talked that way. We kind of got out of that habit, but it's so true. Yeah. I mean, and I would say, you're having a good day today. You may not know it, but you are.
It's rewarding for people to know that they've impacted the lives of others. I mean, that's a deep reward. And I know we would seek to I don't know, pay back in some way, but that is rewarding on its own.
Can you connect for me and for anyone that's listening, how that personal growth for you and your personal board of directors are interrelated? Do you use them in that personal growth way, or are those kind of separate and distinct for you?
Really, only since we began talking about it has that started to emerge for me. To recognize that that so many of the people that I have in my life have things that I aspire to or find valuable. But to be proactive about saying, I like this. I think this is really cool about you. What can you tell me about it? Where did it come from? How did you develop it? What are some of the challenges? I have now hosted 2 different men's groups, and they were like cohort groups that were supposed to last an amount of time. And in this dialogue of speaking with other individuals, to have that chance to ask these questions and then dialogue as a collective of people to hear about their experiences in exactly these ways. That has been very powerful. Yeah.
It's funny, I did a talk back in the spring at an event and talked about the personal board of directors as a part of that talk. And at the end, during kind of question and answer, I think like 80% of the questions that people asked me were about the personal board of directors. And many people wanted to know, how did I ask people to be on my board of directors? And then did I tell them specifically, this is what I'm asking you to be on my board of directors? Which I think is interesting. And I mean, I would say some are more organic than that.
Totally.
We don't have that conversation. But I think it has been very valuable for me to, like you said, go to someone and say, I sense that you have a strength where I have a weakness. And would you help me grow and give me feedback and, help me think through things differently, whatever that is. And it's been very, very rewarding. Again, people are so generous with their time and their effort.
Yeah, they are. Because I have found it enormously rewarding, right? When someone seeks in that way, like, thank you for asking, And I've also had the experience of people just having this, man, I don't want to ask you, I didn't put you out, like this kind of thing. I'm like, please.
Yeah.
It's really a delight.
We had a conversation, I think, I don't think it was our podcast. I think it was a preemptory conversation where we talk about why don't we ask people for help? Because if I'm remembering this correctly,
yes.
right? The disconnect between people want to help, and yet we are reluctant to ask for help.
Totally.
And I don't really understand where that disconnect comes from. I think that maybe is another topic of conversation for another day, but it is interesting because everyone I've talked to wants to invest in other people in that way. And so by not allowing them, we're kind of robbing people of that opportunity.
Totally agree. And even as we've discussed it, I'm still there.
Yeah, I know. I know. I mean, talk about being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? Being uncomfortable to ask someone, I could really use some help in this regard, and this is how I see it. Is there another way that we could approach it? And I mean, how many people say, no, I'm not helping you? Never.
No.
And I mean, rarely, I would say, maybe not never, but rarely.
And totally having discussed it right now, I'm building a list in my head. I really am. I am going to do it.
Well, okay, so that leads us to, so we're probably, getting close on time. So one of the things that we said we wanted to do was talk about and have an action, like a kind of a call to action.
Exactly.
So in your mind, what is the appropriate call to action as we conclude our discussion today?
I think it flows from exactly what we were just talking about, right? Is to consider probably two things. One is to find the people who you have that kind of trust relationship to be asking, what do you think about maybe blind spots that I have? Okay, that's one. And then the other would be, maybe it's not supposed to be two actions, but it's the other would be...
For the overachievers, we'll give two.
Yes, for your Enneagram Type 3s, it would be to take an inventory of people who have things that you admire about them, things that you'd like to see yourself develop in similar ways, and then open a conversation. Yeah,
those are two great actions. So as we think about the next podcast, our next time together, we have invited my mentor whom you've met, Rob Walters.
So stoked for this conversation.
And we're going to invite Rob to talk about mentoring and what his experience was like with me personally. So I'm going to have to brace myself for that conversation because I'm sure I'm going to have uncomfortable moments. So I'm excited to have him. And certainly we want to kind of direct people to, we've got a YouTube channel since we last met. We have a YouTube channel. We've posted on LinkedIn and some of our personal social media things. But we want to hear from others, right?
Totally do.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the feedback that we got and then encourage people, what kind of things would we like to hear from them? Yeah, well, certainly in the beta episode, people were saying, I loved it. I have no idea what you guys are trying to achieve with it. Please do more, but tell me what you're doing. So delighted to receive feedback. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about anyway. So why not also for the podcast itself? If people want to give us comments in the YouTube videos as they see them, respond to them on LinkedIn, reach out to us directly. I want this to be a conversation with everybody. It's not just a conversation, you, me, and our guests. It's something that I want us to be able to bring people along, and the only way to really do that is if they're in the conversation with us. Yeah, absolutely. If people want to be guests, we are definitely open to that. Yep. And if they have suggested topics, we'd love to explore those. Yes. We've got kind of a loose outline at this point, but we tend to pivot and think things through and come to different conclusions sometimes. So so I'm excited about where this is headed. The feedback that we got I was so thankful for it. Oh yeah. And it encouraged me to keep going because this in and of itself makes me very uncomfortable. The presence of a camera makes me very uncomfortable, but we're pushing through it. Well, we as most people with their first episode, they would conclude by saying, we love all our listener. Yeah. I think now we're past that. So there may be two. Maybe two. Yes. So share with your friends. Yeah, right. Awesome. Okay, well, I think that probably concludes us. Did we have anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrapped? No, I think it's good. I love calling it episode 2. In the bag. In the bag. Well, thanks for coming to Naples. It's great to have you in my home. Right on. It's awesome to be here. All right. Excellent. Super. See ya. Yeah. See ya. See ya. This is more on a phone call. You just get to say goodbye and hang up. I know. It's like, I know. Now we have to go. So like one of us was supposed to just disappear from the chair. Okay.